Okay guys, let's open up our DS1 M3 terrain again. So when we open the file, we want to navigate to our tree markers, which are here. We want to open this big component and let's navigate to our birch tree markers, which are orange. Let's open those up as well. And what I'm going to do is, in order to replace this by my low resolution tree, the most efficient way to do it is to select the geometry of the tree marker. As we're doing this, we can also hit W to hide the rest of the model because we don't really need to see that right now. So with everything selected, I'm going to hit G to create a temporary component. The name is not important. What is important, on the other hand, is the component axes. Because if you look at it right now, the axes are sort of on the side of the circle, whereas we need them to be in the center. So we're going to click on Set Component Axes. And I'm going to select the center point, and then it's going to ask you to specify the XYZ axes. So 1, 2, and here we go. And now we can hit create. Now we can, once this is created, we can right click on it and go into the dynamic components menu. So even if your component is not dynamic, the most efficient way to replace them by another component is through this menu. And here we're going to click on swap component. We're going to navigate to our component folder and swap it with a tree birch low resolution. And there you go. So now your birch tree markers are swapped with actual low resolution birches. I'm going to hit W again to show the terrain. So see, this is why we offset these tree markers off the ground, because I don't want them to fall through the terrain here. Now that we have the birches inserted, what I can do, first of all, is I can disable the markers because I don't really need to see them in my working 3D view. And I can go into scenes and create a new scene. And this is going to be my main working scene. So I'm just going to rename it to master. And parallel to that, we want to start, adding scenes in the file that we will be using for things like the site layout. So I'm just going to create another scene actually and name this one site layout. Okay. Now in the site layout scene, I'm going to go into top view and I'm going to go into camera parallel projection. And as you can see here, our trees have basically disappeared because they're cards that we hid the lines of, so there's nothing for SketchUp to show. But we've created, exactly for this scenario, we've created a special layer with our tree markers. So I'm going to go into the layers tab, and here I'm going to enable tree markers, and I'm going to update the scene with the changes. So now we actually have our markers exactly where we want them to be, and we only needed to place the marker once, as opposed to doing it in layout where you need to place it for every single tree. So yeah, that's great. And the process for the ash trees is exactly the same. So I'm gonna, so I basically already downloaded both models of the ash trees and adjusted them both in a to fit our requirements. So with the ash trees, the file looks like this. And yeah, because I made sure that the ash trees and the birch trees use exactly the same layers, basically I can switch back and forth between the master scene and the site layout scene, and my tree location markers will switch accordingly. So these are workable models. They're not they don't look that great, but they will get the job done for most of the things that we're trying to do. At a later point, we can always replace these models with the high resolution models that we've downloaded. So the other great thing about having these trees inside of components is that if, for example, I had more advanced surveying data and I knew that this tree over here was, in fact, let's say 1.3 times taller than all of the others, and I'm just going to make it wider as well. I'm holding down control while I'm using the scale tool, so it makes it wider from the middle, and the implantation point of the tree stays the same. So let's say this tree is bigger than the others, and let's say that we have a very tiny tree over here. So let's say this tree is 0.8 times the size of all the other trees. Usually I like to be super precise, but since this is a tree and you can't exactly predict how big or small the branches are on a specific tree, it's okay to be approximate. So let's say that we have the size variation here. Because these trees are inside of components, when I swap them for their high resolution models, the high resolution meshes will keep the scale information. So I'm going to go ahead and go into dynamic components and swap this low resolution ash tree for a high resolution ash tree. And there you go. So basically you can see that in fact this tree is bigger than the average tree, and this one is smaller. I'm going to switch them back to their low resolution model. But yeah, this is a switch you can do pretty much anytime if you need more accurate shadows, or if you just want to see what your model will look like with nicer trees. Alright, so to summarize this module, we basically imported two versions of the birch tree component from the warehouse. We adjusted both versions and we integrated them into our model. And we started setting up scenes and layers. So we looked at advanced search in the Google warehouse. We looked at groups versus components and component adjustments. So because there are a lot of important elements in all those categories, I'm going to give a slightly more detailed summary than usual for this module in particular. So if we look at the advanced search option in the Google warehouse, using a web browser is always the best idea because it allows you to compile tabs of possibly interesting components and then make a selection among them. Also, the advanced search option provides you with complexity settings, which you can look for low and high resolution polygon versions of the same model. So as far as groups versus components are concerned, there are several differences between groups and components. Each copy of a group adds to file size, whereas components do not. Components have individual axes, groups don't. Components are instanced, groups aren't. Components can be swapped, groups can't. Groups can't have dynamic properties and can't be part of libraries. So for all of these reasons above, always use components instead of groups. So as far as component adjustments are concerned, for the components that you download from Google Warehouse, always move the component geometry to the origin, create proper layers, and keep the naming system consistent and case sensitive. Inside your main SketchUp file, adjust the axes of components you are about to replace so that the new geometry is placed exactly where the old geometry was. And use the outliner to find groups hidden inside components and replace them with components. Alright, so that pretty much covers this module. So as we move along, our models inside of SketchUp will get inevitably heavier. So the next module is all about managing program performance.